This is Mo Ryan, and you're listening to Chuck versus the Podcast.
You were about to enter Chuck versus the Podcast, the place for people who love Chuck and the people who work on Chuck. The only show that takes you behind the scenes with the stars.
Yvonne Strahovski.
Zachary Levi. Joshua Gomez.
Ryan McPartland.
Adam Baldwin.
Sarah Lancaster.
Interactive interviews.
Julia Ling.
Phil Clemmer.
All the cast.
Dixon High. Tony Hale. Scott Krinsky. Mark Christopher Lawrence.
Anita Federici.
Fun hosts.
This is Mel.
This is Liz.
Now you can see how wacko we are.
The writers.
Allie Adler. Scott Rosenbaum. Zev Barrow.
The editors.
Matt Barber. Jeff Granville. Kevin Mock.
Contests.
We are giving away a Chuck press kit.
The directors.
Jason Ensign. Norman Buckley.
The guest stars.
Steve Austin.
Kristen Group.
The music.
This is Tim Jones.
Guest hosts.
I'm Kaylee from Toronto.
Conventions.
Lights come up, and here comes Jester out on stage.
Set visits.
This is the guy right here.
And much more. Are you ready? This is great.
This is Mel.
This is Liz.
And we want to welcome you to Chuck versus the Podcast, episode 41 for Saturday, February 27th, 2010. And I'm sure you noticed our new opening.
That is so cool, Gray. I am so impressed.
Yeah, I know. It's so much fun. Just fresh and new. I love it. It's exciting.
It reminded me of my film school days, just shooting videos for fun. I love it. But we do have a great episode today. And really, really exciting is that we have not one, but two TV critics who are going to be joining us today. One of them is Maureen Ryan from the Chicago Tribune, and also Jace Lacob for the LA Times and Televisionary, TV.com, and The Daily Beast.
Busy guy.
Yep. Because of the length of this episode, we will be splitting it into two parts. Episode 41 with Mo Ryan and episode 42 with Jace Lacob. Both are being released together, but this just makes it a little easier for you to download, watch, and to manage them. And you'll notice that we had twittered that Phil Clemmer was going to be joining us in a roundtable format, and we've just had a bunch of scheduling issues, scheduling conflicts prevented that from happening. We will have Phil on the podcast later. He's actually, I think, been on the podcast more than anybody else at this point, and he'll be coming back. But unfortunately, he couldn't this week. But we were able to have some great conversations with Mo and with Jason. You're gonna love them.
So let's give our girl Mo a call and see if she can join us at this round table.
We want to welcome Maureen Ryan, a TV critic for the Chicago Tribune, with us, and everybody calls you Mo.
Yes, call me Mo.
And do you only write for Chicago Tribune? Because you blog and you do a whole bunch of other stuff too.
Yeah, I write for the Chicago Tribune newspaper, but it gets syndicated various times in ways that I don't understand. So if I Google myself, sometimes I end up in the Malaysian Star, which is always super exciting, or like the paper in Texas or South Carolina. So my stuff in print does appear various places, but and even sometimes the LA Times, but mostly just the Chicago Tribune for print. And then I've got my website, which is super awesome, and I don't know if this is the point at which I would pimp that, or if we wait till the end.
Oh yeah, well, you can do it now. Why not?
ChicagoTribune.com/watcher, where if I could pimp one more thing, Chuck fans should check out my site for information on a charity auction that I'm doing for Haiti relief, and there's going to be some really cool Chuck goodies in there. So there's always near the top of my site something about the charity effort in there. So if you need details, feel free to stop by. And if you don't see them, just email me at moryan@tribune.com and I'll give you the deal.
And I love your Twitter updates. How can people follow you on Twitter?
Twitter is just Mo Ryan. So if you follow at Mo Ryan, you'll get me and all my musings. And at 2:00 in the morning on Friday, I could not restrain myself. I was like, should I go on Twitter now, or should I? And sure enough, I tweeted about the first couple of Chuck episodes, and at 2 a.m, people were replying to me on Twitter, which was like, yes, Chuck Nation in the house. Should be sleeping or partying or doing something.
The Czech Nation never sleeps.
Exactly.
I know Jace Lacob was twittering about every moment. It's like, I have the set. I'm opening the set.
Now
I see the set.
Right. I've read the letter from Josh and Chris, which
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I've now watched all 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to try to be as vague as possible, but if you guys want to just ask me questions about just the show in general or what I thought of those 4, I'll let you guys lead the way.
Mm-hmm. Well, why don't we go sort of chronologically?
Yeah.
We can start sort of what your experience is with this season so far. Like
Okay.
leading up, so Mask hasn't even happened. What do you think of season 3 so far and how it compares to 1 and 2?
Yeah, the first, let me just really briefly sort of state where I'm coming from with Chuck. The first season of the show, I had some trouble with it. And it's funny because I want to go back and kind of watch that again because, I know that Chuck is not about plausibility and, whether this could truly happen. But I just had trouble with, like, why don't they update the intersect? And certain things just didn't click with me. Then in season 2, and I had heard enough good things about it from people I respected to be like, okay, I'm going to give season 2 a try. And really from season 2, from minute 1, I was hooked. And I think the season had a lot of really cool high points, topped by the last couple episodes of the season, which for me were just, outrageously fun. And I was certainly in there pitching with, I hope a small part of an effort that I think was led amazingly by fans, and I certainly take no credit because I really think it was sort of a grassroots thing that the media just kind of latched onto later in the game. So I was very, very excited when the show did get renewed and wrote a lot about that. And season 3, I devoured those first 5 episodes when NBC sent them out. I thought there was some getting back into the swing changes or maybe some rough spots, but overall I thought they were fine. But from the beginning I thought season 3 has a different vibe from it, and I've been really thinking a lot about this. And having interviewed Chris Fedak and Josh Schwartz and having read various pieces by other journalists, I thought that their kind of their mantra was, well, Chuck's really still Chuck, he's the same guy. And I think there's a lot of different ways to view that. I think you can view him as the same guy, but I think he's really maturing and changing in some fairly significant ways. And, there was all the brouhaha a couple of weeks ago, but I think what might have gotten lost in that is the very real transition that Chuck is going through. And I don't know if that's just me seeing that or if you guys see that too. In season 3, because to me, him becoming a real spy and paying that price psychologically and with his friends, it heightens the stakes, which is fine. I'm not against any of this, but I think it's a difficult trick to pull off. And I think when it comes back in March, I think it does pull it off for the most part in 3 of the episodes that I've seen, and not so much in one of them. So. I'll throw it open to you guys.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there, that this is a transition period for Chuck as a character and as a show. And I wonder if we could liken it to adolescence, in that it's somewhat awkward. And I know there have been some critiques from the fans that the writers are not doing their job well. But at the same time, I have to wonder if that awkwardness we're feeling isn't meant to be, because this is from Chuck's point of view.
Exactly. And I think I have to say that writing about Chuck when it returns is going to be one of the most difficult things that I've ever had to do in this job, because you're thinking, it's Chuck, how is this hard? But I think what's really, really tricky for me is I think that there are some frustrations on the part of fans. Some of them I think are valid concerns. Some of them are just a case of, I think the show is evolving and perhaps evolving into something that some people aren't as fond of. And that's completely fine. But I think, to say that the writers are doing it wrong, I mean, okay, I guess if you have your platonic ideal of what Chuck is, and the writers aren't doing that every week, then I guess in your view they're doing it wrong. But I think, for me as a viewer, as a critic, I just feel like, okay, this is their vision. They're going to execute that vision. I don't have to like that vision, but it's theirs. And if they've brought me pleasure with their creations before, I'm going to just go with what they're doing and not sit there and have a checklist in my mind of like things they have to do. Having said that, I think it's a tough balance to pull off. I mean, I think you can look at something like Ugly Betty, which had a really interesting mixture of tones and feelings and plots and situations, some extremely purposefully campy melodrama mixed with heart-tugging family melodrama. And I think that was tough. And I think really what they found with that show is it was just really hard to pull that off week after week. And it was really easy to veer from one extreme to the other and kind of have the viewer just kind of feel like it was out of control. I don't think Chuck's out of control. I just think that for me as a Chuck viewer, sometimes I'm going, is this the same show? I don't know. Is that good or bad?
Well, it's interesting that you compare it with Ugly Betty, because I think pretty much everyone's going to agree that season 3 of Ugly Betty was, it was a surprise that they brought it back. But
absolutely.
Season 4, the current season, has been resurgent creatively.
Yeah.
And in large part because Betty finally made it through this transition.
Right.
She went from being, in a sense, an asset. And now she's a full-fledged member of the staff. She's an editor on the magazine, for those that aren't familiar with the show. And it's an interesting parallel to Chuck. I just am hoping that, and I'm pretty confident that Chuck is going to be able to pull it off pretty quickly in just a couple more weeks.
I think so. I mean, I think you raise an excellent point that, what is the new character that this person morphs into, and is the Ugly Betty of season 4 still someone you care about? And I think though, for my money, season 3 of Chuck hasn't always, stuck the landing in terms of the plotting or the tone or developments or, things like that I wasn't particularly keen on. I think there's still a lot of heart to the show, and I still think with the cast that they have, they are amazingly blessed because they are able to pull off a lot of other stuff that I don't think other people could do. And I think Zachary Levi is such a good actor that I'm going to care about who he plays no matter what he does, And I think that's a really rare gift for a performer to have, and he really has it. So it's given them a lot of leeway in terms of selling stuff. And I got to say, Yvonne Strahovski has really, really stepped it up this season for me. And I think one of the high points of the next few episodes is how great she is. I mean, I went from in season 1 thinking she was perfectly competent to in season 2 thinking, hey, I'm kind of really liking where she's taking this, and she's kind of engaging me more, to in season 3 just feeling, absolutely awed by, how good she's working this role. How well she's working this role. I'm sorry, that was terrible grammar just now.
Well, she has her own transition. The character of Sarah has her own transition that she's making that I think often gets overlooked because, again, Chuck is, of course, the focus of the show.
Well, I think that's totally true. As a matter of fact, what I think people have really missed out on is the fact that she's really damaged goods this season.
Or, I think you guys raise an excellent point, and I think in a way, even for me, when some other things aren't working, and I want to make it clear that for the most part I really liked the episodes, but there are some developments that happen that I think really only because the journey of Sarah is so compelling, I was kind of willing to buy into them. And I think that's a really great point, that we get so caught up in like, well, is Chuck the same guy? I don't know if I'd call her damaged goods. I mean, I think she's definitely hurt.
Yeah, I mean, that was a little strong, but you know what I mean? Like she's really
and it's scary. Yeah. I think what she's really great at portraying is that this is a terrifying time for her because she's seeing this man she loves change into something she fears him becoming, and she herself is opening her heart, and that's beyond terrifying for her. So it's intermixed with all this comedy is some fairly heavy stuff, and I think I love the heavy stuff. I mean, you'll get no bigger fan of, Friday Night Lights or The Wire, but sometimes it's a little dark, you know.
Yeah.
And it's not what we're used to, especially if you go back to season 1. That was so lighthearted.
Absolutely. Exactly.
You know, and then and season 2 was pretty lighthearted as well. I mean, it had its dark moments, but it feels like season 3 we just went straight for the darkness, and there wasn't maybe enough dusk,
well,
if you will.
Yeah, and I think, yes, that's a great way to put it. And I think one of the biggest problems with this season is that the supporting cast is intermittent, and it's just making it seem choppy to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's
and how much of that is the budget?
It's a lot of it is the budget. I'm just surmising. I have not gotten that word from anyone officially associated with the production, but it's absolutely got to be a budget thing. It's quite common in TV for people to have a deal where they're a series regular, but they're only contracted to appear in maybe 10 of the episodes of the 13, or 12, or 10 or 9, whatever. But I think even with the guest cast, we had Shaw was there, and then he's not there, and then Hannah's there, and then one episode she's not there, and it's just kind of making it seem a little bit choppy. And I think it's affecting the tone of the show, because those supporting characters not only ground Chuck's world in some reality and even some sort of relatable mundane reality, but also some comedy. They lighten up the stuff, and I think with the episode that comes back, there's very little of that, and it goes to a kind of place that is, I don't know, it was just an interesting tone. I don't necessarily, it's one of those things where I'm just really wondering what people are going to think of it. I'm not like, oh gosh, there's a funeral and 10 people die. It's not like that. It's recognizably a Chuck episode, but I would guess, if I had to bet money, that if the creators of the show were asked, what episode do you want to take a break on, it would not have been Mask, take a break, and then fake name. Mm-hmm. They would have said,
yeah,
please God, no, not that.
I think they got
well, and it's an important point. It's an important point that they were initially writing for 13. Now they're not. They were originally writing for after the Olympics, and then having to deal with this break, and that's not something that they were writing towards.
Not at all, no. And I think some of what we're seeing this season too, I think, is based on them only having that initial order for 13, and I'm super happy they got more episodes, but I think some of the stuff, as was widely discussed, after the Mask aired, was, I really respect the idea that not everyone in the Chuck fandom was up in arms about these two people having other love interests. They maybe weren't fond of that, but it was really not handled particularly well, especially in the case of Shaw. And I think it's, I would never want to disrespect fans and be like, oh, they're just shippers and they're just, it's like, no, I think, let's distinguish between people just hating the idea of any other characters existing in Chuck and Sarah's orbit versus just having legitimate beefs with how particular elements of the story were handled.
Yeah, and I found it interesting that the shippers, if you want to call them that, weren't. I mean, I got a lot of messages from people saying, "Hey, I'm a shipper," and I had no problems with the episode.
I did too on my site too. They're like, "Okay," I think I've just gotten some feedback from some fans saying, please don't paint us all like we're just crazy people who don't like anything but Chuck and Sarah. But I never really saw it as that. And in fact, if the biggest problem I had with Mask was, I just thought the plotting left large gaps in logic and the space-time continuum, so that was kind of where what jumped out at me.
I think that's what had so many fans upset, and why the hullabaloo lasted as long as it did, was because these other mainstream, I'm not going to call them critics because they don't normally talk about Chuck, commentators, if you will, from NPR and Time and even the LA Times, picked up on this unrest, and they specifically targeted one comment on Alan Sepinwall's blog calling for a boycott.
But I can just offer you the perspective of being in the media. I was on Alan's site. I was just like looking at comments. I was just lurking. And when I saw that, and I saw the level of anger. And for my money, I mean, maybe I'm just overly impressed by the Chuck fans' organizational abilities, but we as critics saw the Chuck fan base in a viral way decide to make something happen and make it happen. And so it was scary. And I think social media certainly amplifies that. Something that would have been a 2-day wonder on a few sites turned into something bigger. But I think it wasn't just necessarily that person calling for a boycott.
No, that's what I was going to say, is they picked up on that.
Right.
And the reality was
it was a lot of other stuff.
Most of the complaints were with those last like 8 or 10 minutes and how rushed it felt.
Yeah.
That was the complaint, not that they were together or possibly getting together. Not that Sarah told him that she liked having her neck touched.
Right.
But that it was such a complete 180 from 10 minutes earlier.
It was. I totally, yeah. And but having said that, I think there's a legitimate issue that I thought some of the pieces that came out, or some of the commentators' pieces, were interesting because it's kind of like, you know, for us, it was just an interesting idea of like, is this now a fan-owned show? And what do people want? And why do they perhaps want it? And will they be happy when they get what they want? You know what I mean? It's
right.
Because I think there's a particular subset of critics, and I would count myself in this group, or writers about entertainment, who are crazy obsessed with destroying the idea that moonlighting was ruined by those characters getting together. And I think
I loved Linda Holmes' essay on that.
And I think that's why I liked her piece on Chuck and Sarah. And it's like I think if there's anything that gets people riled up, it's this idea that, you know, oh gosh, if you got them together, it would ruin the show. It's like, that is just really lazy thinking. It could ruin a show, or it could not ruin a show. Right. Why don't you look at your show and see if it would ruin that show?
Exactly, you know? Exactly. And I think it was a perfect opportunity to have that discussion with the fans about ownership and entitlement. I think, and I honestly think it needed to be said in some cases. It was just that was the overall response that the fans were getting, and most of them were saying, wait, that's not what we were upset about. You're missing the point. And that just had them, I mean, I moderated at least 1,000 comments on our site alone in that week. And, you know, and I had a couple of people write articles saying, you know, directed towards the critics in particular, who wrote those pieces, saying, look, you're not getting it, you're not hearing us. Unfortunately, they didn't come in until, you know, several days.
But you know, what's interesting to a fan sometimes just isn't as interesting to a critic.
Exactly.
You know? And that's just
you can't
the way
tell
it
them
is.
that. You can't say, you know, sure, write this letter, but they don't care. That doesn't get them.
Well, and it's like, just like you can't say to fans, hey, don't be concerned about that, care about this. It's like, you can't. It's like hurting cats. You can't make them do anything, you know?
Exactly. So, but, you know, I just did want to get out there that was the majority of the anger, I think, was not necessarily that Shaw and Sarah might have something starting up there, but just that it seems so very out of character.
Well, could you go into that a little bit more? Because I absolutely agree that how they played those two characters in just within that episode, that the transition was way too, it was nonsensical. Like, it didn't make any sense that her feelings would change that quickly, even if she was feeling rebuffed by Chuck or feeling bummed about him getting together with Hannah. You know, I mean, it didn't make a whole lot of sense. But I mean, I just want you guys to talk about.
I'll tell you,
where you're coming from with the whole Sarah thing.
Well, I even think it was like, everybody talks about the last 8 minutes. It could have even been a directing decision that day. The one scene when Brandon Ruth Shaw is flirting with Sarah in the museum, all it would have taken is a slight change of direction for her to show some tiny interest at that point. And a seed would have been planted to say, okay, later on, now I believe it.
I guess I was reading that scene as her playing it as, I'm being extra hostile to you because I don't want to admit to myself that I'm attracted.
I was going to say, those of us who have perhaps read more romance novels than we'd like to admit I have to confess that while I agree that it seemed like it was a complete 180 on her behalf, I did read that scene the same way the first time I watched it, and then on subsequent viewings, I absolutely see that that view could be supported because, it just maybe it's a female thing. I don't know, Liz.
Yeah.
Did you see it that way?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. It may be just a female point of view there, but
I do think but I do think that there's an element of that could have been played differently.
Yeah.
And I think we have to acknowledge the fact that, basically, she doesn't have a lot of chemistry with Brandon. There's no reflection on Yvonne, but those two actors don't really click together. And if somehow there had been more chemistry between, whoever played Shaw or, Brandon and Yvonne, that just might have, it just didn't quite get there.
yeah.
Either in the directing, in the acting, or in the chemistry, all of which I think we're trying for a certain thing, and maybe it came across to a degree, but it could have been done a little better, maybe.
Now I wonder, and this is another just kind of instantaneous reaction that I had, and I have to admit I was pretty surprised by how very upset the comments coming in over the next 12 to 18 hours were after the end of the episode. But my first reaction when I saw those final few minutes and it looked like she had just completely changed her attitude toward him was not, oh my gosh, look at that terrible writing. It was, whoa, what is her motive here?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
Sarah's a spy. I mean,
Right.
she's established
I had that
as being an
thought
excellent
too.
spy.
I had that thought too, and I guess that's why, for me, I was also a little taken aback by the reaction, because first of all, my reaction was driven by the fact that, these people are not listed as cast members this season. You know what I mean? Like, I was
Right.
like, well,
We know the end is in
I
sight.
think that the end is going to come, and this is, I may not necessarily be fond of the, romantic interest of the week, again for the 8th time, but I get what that is, and I'm not so threatened by it, in that sense. I think that colored my response as well. The idea that maybe she's working an angle here and doing her job and doesn't really trust this guy and is, trying to get information. And having said that, again, I think, I don't know that they've sold that particularly
Well, obviously not. And again, it would have taken just a slight change in direction, but because the episode right before that, we got full on Sarah in seduction mission mode.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, maybe they thought that was going to carry over and that we were going to remember that and see her applying that to Shaw. It just didn't work. It just didn't happen. Something, I don't know if there's like a 30-second part of a scene that's been cut that would have explained it all. I don't know, but that was my first reaction was, whoa, the red flag here is, what is Sarah doing? What is she up to?
Right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is that I would say most people have no problem with Chuck and
They're
Hannah.
just so adorable.
They are adorable.
And this is where the hate mail is going to come from. But I was rewatching the episode for tonight's discussion, and they're at the beginning when they're at the Buy More, and she's telling she's saying, "Teach me," and he's, "Oh, I don't know if you're ready to go out on a mission yet." It's just so cute. It's the kind of lighthearted banter that I think people have been missing between Chuck and Sarah, and it was just, I don't know, it was just working for me. Speaking of chemistry, it worked. So
absolutely, I think that they had, I think those two actors had a nice vibe together, and now I'm veering into 3.8 fake name territory, and I can't do that.
So, well, let's talk about what we did like about The Mask.
My most favorite part was what was going on between Morgan and Ellie, most particularly Morgan. Very often I find myself not liking his character, but when something, then all of a sudden out of the blue, something will happen and he'll just grab me, just right at the heart. So, I don't know.
You couldn't help but feel for him there at the end. I mean, of course, Chuck didn't know that Morgan had a crush on Hannah. So, he wasn't betraying his friend, but gosh, Morgan's whole heart was crushed.
Yeah, and it wasn't just that, though. It wasn't just that. It was just Morgan realizing that, Chuck isn't being upfront and honest with them. I think all of that kind of culminated for Morgan. And, I don't know. I just felt so strongly for the character. I felt so bad for Morgan.
I totally love the episode. The scene in the museum when the doors are opening and closing and opening
scary.
and closing. Yeah. But I emailed it, and it's funny because you know how you watch kind of in isolation. I saw the episode and I loved it. I emailed Phil Klemmer right away saying, "Great job, one of my favorites of the season." I had no idea all this was going to explode.
I found myself really taken aback. I mean, I didn't love the ending, but I just thought, well, they're going to explain this somehow, and we'll get some kind of answer. But then I think what really caught fire for me in terms of seeing everyone's reactions, or what kind of sparked a reaction in me, was the idea that Chuck and Sarah getting together. I think that one thing that we keep hearing from the creators is have patience, we have a plan, we know what we're doing, this and that. I think there's a point at which your patience is just being tested.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's perfectly valid for a viewer to say, well, I think my patience has been tested enough. Thank you very much and good night. And if people want to bail for that reason, they're still not getting them together. I mean, if I were to do the devil's advocate analysis of Chuck, they're not getting this couple with ridiculous chemistry together. They're determined to keep them apart for sometimes dubious reasons, or manufactured reasons. They're taking it a more serious direction. There's less of the comedy because less of the supporting cast is available on a regular basis. So, I mean, that's the devil's advocate viewpoint, in which my own spouse was, offering to me at various times, and I just said, well, I really think you should give it a chance. And so I've still got him on the Chuck train, but I think there's some wavering, and I think that's another reason that people took note of the brouhaha, because Chuck is not Grey's Anatomy. It's not a show that will for sure come back no matter what, barring a nuclear bomb falling on the set. And if it's got a delicate relationship with its fans, because it has very, very active fans and very devoted fans. But having a devoted fan base, as the creators of Lost will tell you, is a double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always a pleasant experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Lost, you love Lost. That's a show that delivers very strongly, and yet has had a few episodes that sort of lose people for a little while, and then the people come back and lose people for a little while. But you trust them because of what you've seen. I trust Chuck because of what I've seen. Very similarly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's. I do trust them, and I do. Here's the thing: when Chuck is really working, few shows please me as much. Few shows make me feel. Basically, when Chuck is really working, it makes me feel like every single, ounce of devotion that I've put into the show, I'm getting back, triple.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that, but I think that doesn't necessarily, for me, and I don't think for fans either, make us think, well, then it gets a free pass, because that free passes don't exist.
No, and I think one of the things that came out of when we were running the renewal campaign, one of the compliments that the Chuck fandom received was what a smart campaign it was, how intelligent it was.
Yep.
So I think that it wouldn't be fair to then say, oh, well, the show's back on, so there's no longer any intelligence, and there, nobody's going to question
exactly
the show. And this is a smart fan base.
Yep.
So
and I've seen this happen with so many shows. And again, I've seen it happen with episodes where I'm like, really? People are mad about this episode? It's just, you can never predict, but people can get very up in arms. And, I would actually compare it to the Buffy Joss Whedon fan base, in that people are very, very devoted, but they're also extremely demanding. and I think rightfully so, of what they're seeing and what, they're holding these creators to a higher standard because they know what they're capable of. So it's a lot of pressure for the Chuck staff, but they seem to deliver.
Yeah, the majority of the time, they deliver to that higher standard, I think.
But it's always hard to know, like, in your mind, like, okay, I know the absolute best that you're capable of. You know what I mean? And
exactly. And then when they don't meet it, there's so much disappointment because
there's more disappointment, right? Because
think so.
You're really expecting X and you get Y, and you're like, no.
Well, yeah. But and I think one of the unfortunate side effects of this brouhaha over the end of The Mask is that fans are not really spending a lot of time talking about the rest of the episode, which was pretty good. Like Gray pointed out, the Morgan and Ellie storyline, it was nice to see them working together again, or attempting to. Yes.
The secret knock.
To see Ellie concerned about her brother and to see his best friend concerned about Chuck, that was, that's not something we've been able to see a lot because of the intermittent supporting characters. So it was nice to see them and nice to see a storyline with the two of them together.
In any episode of Chuck, there's going to be stuff that I like. I think in general, Mask was just okay for me. And I don't mean that as sort of, faint praise, it's terrible. It just didn't quite, it held out some promise that because here's the thing, for me as a Chuck fan, I really don't like it when the plotting feels thrown together. And that was actually some of my problem in the first season, was that it just felt kind of like, when it really pops for me is when the comedy is working, when the relationships have stakes, when the situation is has tension but also comic relief, and it makes sense. Within the Chuck universe, I want this to make sense and not have a lot of loose ends or plot holes. And
like Dubai last time. Dubai in the last episode.
I kept thinking with Nacho Sampler, I was like, why would this guy who's stolen high-tech products from a very dangerous group of people go to a public trade show
with guns
where there are many weapons? I just was like, boy, this guy does not seem that smart. If he's supposed to be a genius, I'm not buying it.
Doesn't have the street smarts, that's for sure.
No. So there was some stuff like that, and I'm going to just say, in the interest of full disclosure, there were some issues like that I had in the episode that airs when the show comes back on March 1st. It's challenging for me. How do I talk about Chuck? I want people, when Chuck comes back, to watch the show, and I'm going to say that thing that sometimes can drive me a little bit up the wall when creators say it, which is have faith. And even if you feel like maybe that wasn't perhaps your most favorite mixture of Chuck elements or your favorite set of circumstances or story, I would say definitely keep the faith. You know what I mean? I think it will pay off down the road.
I know there are a couple of things that are coming up in the next episode that are supposed to be pretty good payoffs. We know that it's Kristen Crook's last episode.
Yep.
That it's Hannah's last episode.
Yep.
So seeing her exit, I think, is going to be something that fans will greet happily. No offense to Kristen, because she's done a wonderful job.
She's delightful.
Yes.
And I think that she was very underused on Smallville. Sidebar. Just had to say that. I mean, she was used, but I mean, that show does not strike me as, using the people who can act very well. Let's put it that way. Oh, ouch. Sorry, keep going. I interrupted.
Well, and then there's also, we know that the fake name in part refers to Sarah. And that Yvonne has said that there was something coming up in this batch of episodes. I think she was saying in episodes 6 to 11 or 10 that fans had been waiting for. And I think the overall assumption is that she's talking about finding out Sarah's real name. So that's what I'm looking forward to, those two elements. The rest of it, I don't know. We'll wait and see.
I think it'll be surprising for people how all that plays out. And I think there's more than one fake name. So just
There
putting
always
that
is.
out
There
there.
always is.
There's a few. There's a nacho sampler of fake names, I think.
Yes.
So
That could lead us to. We know you've seen
Yes.
8, 9, 10, and 11. Just in a general way, spoiler-free. Maybe you could talk about even further in the future.
I have some clues about what happens down the road. I don't.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. I wanted to know that. Actually, that makes me more excited.
I accidentally spoiled her earlier today because I thought something had already happened that hadn't.
Oh, that's okay. Honestly, the worst accidental spoiling of my life was when someone told me something about a Lost finale that had not aired, that this person assumed that I knew, and it ruined the entire finale.
Oh, no.
No, Mel, honestly, it was
no.
fine what transpired earlier today. In a nutshell, I really, for me, the episode when it comes back was one that, in some regards, I think some groundwork was laid that gets paid off later. It's not for me, I know that other people who've seen it think it's very funny and it has some great stuff from Zach. I just thought overall the episode that I loved the most from that set of 4 is the one that airs on March 8th. It's 3.9, Chuck versus the Beard. An absolutely stellar episode. I believe it's Scott Rosenbaum's last one, and I just, from start to finish, absolutely adored it. And it's one of my favorites of all time. I think for me, it's up there with Chuck versus the Colonel. It just really is firing on every possible cylinder really, really well. Lots of buy more action. And just, I love that. I love that when it's all kind of like the gang's all here stuff. So, the other, again, I've seen the 4 that air in March. 3 of them are, ones that I thought were extremely strong. And I think the important part is they move the ball down the field. You know what I mean? Like it's not just like, and then we're going to do this and, nothing's really changed. And it's just kind of like a one-off mission, which can be great. I'm not like dismissing that idea, but they're really meaty episodes. I mean, I think it's fairly vague enough to say that there's one episode that's very John Casey intensive, which you could give me like 3 hours of, Adam Baldwin grunting, and I would like replay that on my TiVo like 20 times. I would love that. So it's really good because you've got Robert Patrick as a guest star, and it's anytime it's a John Casey episode. It's funny to me because like, even if it's a Casey episode, he doesn't necessarily get substantially more lines because of the nature of the character. He doesn't need them. He doesn't need them. And that's really, such a testament to Adam's skill, is that, he's really able to do so much with every other, tool in his actor's toolkit. And then, heading toward the end of the season, definitely the last one of the bunch that I saw is 3.11, Chuck versus the Final Exam. It very much feels like a setup for big things to come, and it is a big episode as well. So, will it address every concern that fans have about everything to do with the show? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, it didn't for me, but it was one of those things where when the show is 94% working for me, when an episode is like 94.6% working for me, that I'm willing to go, oh God, this again. You know what I mean? With whatever kind of, is a problem for me.
I'm having such a difficult time here because I know a lot of what's coming up.
Yeah,
I can't say it.
It's hard. It's hard. Well, what I keep having to remind myself too is that there's a lot more to come. For some reason, I keep thinking, oh, and then, episode 11 of the season, it's like but it's almost the end of that arc, and I'm really, I honestly, I know that a lot of, I think a lot of people out there in the fandom and some people on this podcast have more of an idea what's to come late in the season. I have zero idea, and I'm like, I don't know what they do. They do something. It's going to be big. I hope it's big. We'll see. It has to be awesome, though. I demand that.
Indeed. It wouldn't be Chuck if we didn't demand that it were awesome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There were just a few questions that came in from fans, and I think we've addressed most of them, at least obliquely. But one question that I've been asked and that was then suggested that I talk to you is, fans, they hear from people like you, Mo, and from Jace and Alan, who have seen in advance and know things in advance and are told, again, the dreaded phrase, keep the faith.
Right.
And the question is
a phrase that makes me want to punch people in the face.
I know.
So if people want to punch me in the face, I'm totally down with that.
Oh, no, please don't be going around punching me in the face.
No, don't punch me.
Not.
I meant that theoretically,
okay,
like in your mind.
Yeah. But the question is, with your kind of insider knowledge now, do you feel that you're watching the same show as the rest of the fans, the ones that don't really have any insider knowledge? In other words, when you are giving your impression of, for example, 3.8, knowing what the next 3 episodes entail, do you feel like you're able to be objective towards that episode?
Yeah, because I can just look at my notes that I wrote for that, not knowing anything.
Right.
And, debate. I had a sort of a debate with my husband and a friend before I watched the next one. So, it's, I guess to a certain degree, it's going to be colored by knowing what comes. And I think, actually, it's funny. I think I'm not comparing myself to the writers of the show, but I think sometimes they live with these stories so intensely. And this, I'm not even just referring to Chuck. I think in general, this is something that I've seen happen. They know something. They assume that we know it to the extent that they do. And I perhaps need something spelled out for me that they're just assuming, you know what I mean? So, or they're just saying they know that something pays off down the road in a satisfying way. And I don't know that. And I actually think that that's a very valid point. I actually raised that question in an email debate I was having with Alan about the episodes, or just a conversation, I shouldn't say debate, that sometimes writers know more than we do. And we're so emotionally attached to the show that we live in fear that some part of it that we like might go away. So, to have someone say, "Oh, keep the faith," it can be like, well, why? I don't know that the stuff that you know. But yeah, I think for individual episodes, I watch them as they come, and I take notes on everything. And sometimes I'll watch something twice before I move on to the next one. So individually, I try to focus on each one, especially because I'm wondering about maybe for these episodes that air when the show comes back, if I should do a weekly blog post, or if I should just I don't know. I'm already doing that for a couple other shows. I'm just wondering how much of a suicide, how suicidal that would be to deal with in terms of just comments and moderation and stuff.
Oh, take the risk, Mo. You want to.
I should. Well, I honestly do feel like, people might see the episode. People are going to be pent up with, desire to see Chuck. They're going to see the episode that airs on March 1st. And I want to say this again. Do I think, oh my gosh, this is like some horrible episode of Joey? No, it's not like that. I want to put it out there that there are elements to the episode that I like. It's an episode of Chuck. It's recognizably not, taking place on Mars or whatever. But people might have concerns or questions or thoughts. And I think they are going to probably get irritated if people like me say, just stick with it. But I want somewhere to say stick with it, because I think it's so worth it if people just give it another chance. My husband, I will say this, my husband and I watched Fake Name. He was like, and he's not a message board guy. He does not go online for anything aside from fantasy football knowledge. And he was like, I don't know if this is the really, you can watch the show without me now. And I'm like, no. You have to watch the next one before you make the decision. You have to watch the next one. And he's like, okay, that was awesome. So, nice. We'll see.
Well, that sounds like a good note to wrap it up on.
So.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Mo, we want to thank you so much for joining us.
You know where I live, so come find me.
We'll send Liz over there.
I just, I want to get, my money's worth out of my $25, Skype headset. So call me anytime.
All right.
Cool. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, Mo.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right.
Mo.
Take care. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Okay. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
And that concludes part 1 of our marathon video podcast talking about The Mask. Watch for part 2 in episode 42, out later today.